I was 32 years old the first time I understood that some parts of Yellowstone were never meant to be mapped. Before we go any further, I want to know who's listening right now. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. Are you alone? In bed? I want to picture who's hearing this with me tonight. My name is Marcus, though that's not what it said on my Ranger uniform back in 2019. I'm changing some details here to protect my identity, but what I'm about to tell you happened exactly as I describe it. Every word is true, even the parts I wish weren't. I'd been a backcountry ranger at Yellowstone for 4 seasons when I was assigned to survey a section of the Washburn Range that hadn't been formally assessed in over 15 years. Budget cuts, staff turnover, and the sheer size of the park meant that some areas simply fell through the cracks. This particular zone sat in a wedge of land between 2 maintained trails, dense with lodgepole pine and steep enough that most hikers chose easier routes. The assignment was straightforward. Hike in, document trail conditions, check for hazards, update GPS coordinates, and hike out. 2 days, solo, with a satellite phone for emergencies. I'd done this kind of work dozens of times. I started early on a Wednesday morning in late August. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes the park look like something out of a postcard. I signed out at the district office, confirmed my route with my supervisor, and headed toward the trailhead. The first few hours were routine. I followed an old ranger trail that appeared on maps from the 1970s, but had been largely abandoned when a newer, safer route was established a mile to the east. The path was overgrown in places, forcing me to navigate by compass and GPS, but the terrain was manageable. Around noon, I stopped for lunch near a small clearing. The forest pressed close on all sides, and I noticed something odd. The clearing was almost perfectly circular, maybe 20 feet across, and the ground inside it was bare. Not just clear of undergrowth, but completely bare. No grass, no pine needles, no fallen branches, just hard-packed dirt. I walked the perimeter slowly. The transition from dense forest floor to bare earth was abrupt, like someone had drawn a line. I crouched and ran my hand over the soil. It was cold, colder than it should have been given the afternoon sun, and it had a faint chemical smell I couldn't place. I took photos, marked the location on my GPS, and made a note to mention it in my report. Probably some kind of thermal feature, I thought, though the ground didn't feel hot, and there was no steam or sulfur smell. I finished my lunch quickly. Something about the clearing made me uneasy, though I couldn't articulate why. The forest around it was too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the whisper of wind through pine needles. I continued deeper into the survey area. By mid-afternoon, I'd documented 3 washed-out sections of trail, 2 downed trees blocking the path, and several areas where erosion had made footing dangerous. Standard stuff. I was making good time. That's when I found the second trail. It appeared suddenly, branching off to the left of the route I was following. It wasn't on my map. It wasn't on the GPS. But it was clearly a trail, well-defined, recently used, with boot prints pressed into the soft earth. I stopped and studied it carefully. The prints were fresh, maybe a day old, size 10 or 11, deep impressions suggesting a heavy pack. But here's what bothered me. According to my GPS, I was 3 miles from the nearest maintained trail and 5 miles from any designated camping area. No permits had been issued for this zone in the past month. I checked before leaving. I keyed my radio. Base, this is Marcus on Washburn Survey. Found an unmarked trail at coordinates. I rattled off the numbers. Recent boot prints heading west. Any authorized personnel in this area? The response came back after a moment. Negative, Marcus. You should be solo out there. Probably just a hiker who wandered off route. Mark it and continue your survey. I acknowledged and took more photos, but something felt wrong. The prints were too purposeful, too evenly spaced. Whoever made them knew exactly where they were going. I should have kept moving on my planned route. That's what protocol said. But curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow the unmarked trail for just a few hundred yards to see where it led. The path wound through dense timber, climbing gradually. The boot prints continued, always the same gait, the same depth. After about 10 minutes, I came to another clearing. This one was larger, maybe 40 feet across, and like the first, it was completely bare. No vegetation, no debris, just that same hard-packed cold earth. In the center sat a cairn, a pile of stones stacked about waist-high. I approached slowly. The stones were smooth river rock, not native to this elevation. Someone had carried them up here deliberately. As I got closer, I saw something tucked into a crevice near the top of the cairn. A piece of paper, wrapped in plastic and wedged between two stones. My training told me not to disturb it. This could be evidence of illegal activity, but my hand was already reaching for it before my brain caught up. I pulled out the plastic-wrapped paper and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn map, detailed and precise, showing the area I was surveying. But it included features that weren't on any official map. Trails that didn't exist, clearings marked with X's, and at the bottom, in small, cramped handwriting, "Stay on the marked paths. Do not follow the circles after dark." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around the clearing again, more carefully this time. The light was starting to fade. Long shadows stretched from the tree line, and I realized with a start that I'd spent more time following the unmarked trail than I'd intended. It would be getting dark in less than 2 hours. I stuffed the map into my pack, took photos of the cairn and the clearing, and turned back the way I'd come. That's when I noticed the boot prints had changed. They no longer led back toward the main trail. Instead, they circled the clearing, moving around the perimeter in a slow, deliberate loop. And they were deeper now, as if whoever made them had been carrying something heavier. My pulse quickened. I checked my GPS. The device showed my location clearly, but the trail I'd just followed didn't appear on the screen. According to the GPS, I was standing in the middle of unmarked forest. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Technology glitches happened in dense canopy. I knew the general direction back to the main trail. I just needed to retrace my steps. I started walking, following the boot prints backward. But after 50 yards, they simply stopped. One clear print, then nothing. The ground beyond showed no disturbance, no sign anyone had passed through. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the forest. The trees looked the same in every direction. Dense, dark, pressing close. "This is Marcus," I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. I think I'm turned around. GPS is acting up. I'm going to head east toward the main trail and check in when I reach it." Static hissed. No response. I tried again. Nothing. The satellite phone, I thought. That always works. I pulled it from my pack and powered it on. The screen glowed, showing no signal. That shouldn't be possible. I was on a ridgeline with clear line of sight to the sky. "Okay," I told myself. "Stay calm. You're a trained ranger. You know how to navigate. East is that way. The main trail is less than a quarter mile. Just walk." I started moving, keeping the setting sun on my left to maintain an eastward bearing. The forest seemed to grow darker with each step, shadows pooling between the trees like spilled ink. After 10 minutes, I should have reached the main trail. Instead, I found myself standing at the edge of another clearing. This one was smaller, maybe 15 feet across, and in the center stood a tent. A small, two-person backpacking tent, the kind you could buy at any outdoor store. It was set up properly, guy lines taut, rainfly secured. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. "Park ranger? Anyone here?" No response. I approached cautiously, hand moving instinctively toward the bear spray on my hip. Something about the tent felt wrong. The fabric was faded, sun-bleached in a way that suggested it had been here for a long time, but the setup was too neat, too deliberate for an abandoned campsite. I circled it slowly, no gear visible outside, no food bags hanging from trees, no sign of a fire ring. "This is a park ranger," I said louder. "If you're in there, I need you to come out and show me your permit." Silence. I reached for the zipper on the tent fly, hesitated, then pulled it open in one quick motion. The tent was empty, completely empty. No sleeping bag, no pad, no gear. Just bare nylon floor and walls. Except for one thing. In the exact center, someone had scratched something into the ground beneath the tent floor. The fabric was thin enough that I could see the marks through it. Letters carved deep into the dirt. "Turn back." My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away from the tent, eyes scanning the tree line. The forest had gone completely silent. Not even the wind moved through the branches. I pulled out my compass, hands shaking slightly. The needle spun lazily, unable to settle on any direction. I tapped it. The needle spun faster. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from somewhere behind me. The heavy crunch of boots on forest floor. I turned, hand on my bear spray. "Who's there? Identify yourself!" The footsteps continued, moving in a wide circle around the clearing, just inside the tree line where shadows made it impossible to see clearly. "This is a park ranger," I said, louder now, trying to inject authority into my voice. "Step into the clearing where I can see you." The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, everything was still. Then, from the darkness between the trees, a voice spoke. It was calm, almost conversational, and it sounded exactly like my own voice. "Stay on the marked paths," it said, using my words, my inflection. "Do not follow the circles after dark." My blood went cold. I did the only thing that made sense. I ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, not caring about direction, just needing to put distance between myself and whatever was in those trees. Behind me, I heard the footsteps again, keeping pace, never quite catching up, but never falling behind. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. The forest blurred around me, everything looking the same, trees and shadows and darkness closing in. Then suddenly, I burst out onto a trail, a real trail, with defined edges and trail markers. I recognized it immediately, the main Washburn Trail, the one I'd started from that morning. I stopped, gasping for breath, and looked back. The forest behind me was still and quiet. No footsteps, no voice, just ordinary wilderness. I checked my radio. It crackled to life immediately. "Marcus, this is Base. We've been trying to reach you for the past hour. What's your status?" My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the radio. I'm back on the main trail. I got turned around. Everything's fine now." "Copy that. Sun's almost down. Do you want us to send someone to meet you, or can you make it back to the trailhead?" I looked at the sky. The sun sat just above the western ridge, maybe 30 minutes of good light left. The trailhead was less than 2 miles away. "I can make it," I said. "I'll be out before dark." I hiked faster than I probably should have, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. The forest seemed normal again. Birds called from the canopy. A squirrel chittered at me from a branch. The world had resumed its regular programming. I reached the trailhead just as the last light faded from the sky. My truck sat exactly where I'd left it, looking wonderfully ordinary and real. I filed my report the next morning, keeping it clinical and factual. Unmarked trail observed, possible unauthorized camping, unusual clearings that may indicate thermal features, recommend further investigation with a full survey team. I didn't mention the voice. I didn't mention the tent or the message scratched into the dirt. Those details went into my personal journal, written late at night when I couldn't sleep. The park sent a team out 3 weeks later to investigate. They found the main trail I'd been surveying, documented the same hazards I'd noted, and reported nothing unusual. No unmarked trails, no bare clearings, no tent. The hand-drawn map I'd taken from the cairn was still in my pack. I'd forgotten to turn it in with my report. When I finally looked at it again, the paper was blank. Not faded, not smudged, just completely blank, as if nothing had ever been written there. I finished out that season, but I requested a transfer to front country operations the following spring. When people ask why I left backcountry work, I tell them I wanted more human interaction, more regular hours. I don't tell them about the voice in the woods that knew how to sound like me. I don't tell them about the trails that appear only when you're alone, leading to places that aren't on any map. And I don't tell them that sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that message scratched into the dirt under the tent. Turn back. I did turn back. I got out. But I still wonder who left that warning and how many people found it too late. The thing about working nights at a thermal basin is that you learn to trust your nose more than your eyes. If you're still with me, let me know in the comments. Are you listening in the dark? Tell me what time it is where you are right now. My name is Jennifer, though like I said, that's not the name I used at Yellowstone. I worked as a night patrol ranger in the Upper Geyser Basin area during the summer of 2021. What I'm about to tell you is documented in my personal incident log, though the official reports tell a different story. The basin at night is a different world. When the last tour bus leaves and the boardwalk's empty, the geysers and hot springs stop being attractions and return to what they really are. Wounds in the Earth's skin, places where the planet breathes out heat and chemicals that can kill you in seconds if you step wrong. My job was simple. Walk the boardwalks after midnight, make sure no one had stayed past closing, check that all the gates were locked, and watch for any signs of thermal feature changes that might pose a danger. I'd done it for 2 months without incident. The problems started on a Tuesday in early July. I was doing my usual sweep, starting at Old Faithful and working my way along the northern loop. It was warm for a summer night, and the steam hung thick in the air, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet in any direction. My flashlight beam scattered in the mist, creating more shadows than it eliminated. I'd just passed Morning Glory Pool when I heard voices. At first, I thought it was teenagers who'd snuck in after hours. It happened sometimes. Kids wanting to see the geysers without the crowds, not understanding how dangerous it was to be out here in the dark, where one wrong step meant death. I stopped walking and listened. The voices were faint, muffled by steam, but definitely human. A conversation, 2 people maybe, coming from somewhere ahead near Castle Geyser. I keyed my radio. This is Jennifer on Basin Patrol. I have possible visitors past closing near Castle, moving to investigate. I approached quietly, following the voices. As I got closer, something about the conversation started to feel wrong. The rhythm was off. One voice would speak, pause, then the other would respond with the exact same words, like an echo but delayed by several seconds. I rounded a curve in the boardwalk and stopped. The mist had cleared slightly around Castle Geyser, and I could see the massive cinder cone clearly in the moonlight. The geyser sat quiet, not due to erupt for hours. The boardwalk ahead was empty, but the voices continued. They were coming from the steam itself, rising from the runoff channels that fed away from the geyser. As I listened, I realized the voices were repeating visitor conversations I'd heard earlier that day. A mother asking her daughter to stand still for a photo. A tour guide explaining eruption patterns. A man proposing to his girlfriend. All of it played back in perfect detail, rising from the hot water like recordings. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the day's conversations repeat themselves in the darkness. My training had covered a lot of scenarios, wildlife encounters, medical emergencies, even how to handle aggressive visitors, but nothing about geothermal features that recorded and played back human voices. I marked it in my log as possible auditory illusion caused by steam and wind, even wrote it up that way, but I didn't believe it. The second incident happened 3 nights later. I was checking the southern section near Grotto Geyser when my flashlight beam caught something on the boardwalk ahead. A figure, standing perfectly still about 50 yards away, facing away from me. My heart rate spiked. "Park Service," I called out. "You need to leave the basin immediately. It's past closing time." The figure didn't move, didn't turn around, just stood there, a dark silhouette against the lighter steam. I approached slowly, hand on my radio. As I got within 20 feet, details emerged. It was a man, average height, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. His posture was odd, too rigid, like someone standing at attention. "Sir, I need you to turn around and walk with me toward the exit." Nothing. No response, no movement. I was close enough now to see that something was very wrong. The edges of the figure seemed blurred, indistinct, and there was no shadow. The moon was bright enough that everything cast shadows. Everything except this. I reached out with my flashlight, extending it toward the figure's shoulder. The beam passed through where solid cloth should be and illuminated the steam on the other side. The figure was made of steam. As I watched, it slowly turned to face me. The features were vague, suggestions of eyes and a mouth rather than actual details. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, from the ground and the air and the water. "Help me," it said. "I can't find my way back." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a railing. The figure took a step toward me, its foot making no sound on the wooden boards. "Where's the path?" it asked, using a different voice now. A woman's voice. "It's so hot. Why is it so hot?" Then another voice, layered over the first two. "I just wanted a better photo. Just one step closer." My hands shook as I raised my radio. "Base, this is Jennifer. I have a situation at Grotto. I need backup now." The figure took another step closer. More voices joined the chorus, all speaking at once, fragments of last words and confused questions and one repeated phrase that cut through the rest. "Don't let me fall." I ran. Protocol said to never run on wet boardwalks at night, but I ran anyway. Behind me, the voices followed, echoing off the center formations, dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, all pleading for help that came too late. I didn't stop until I reached the visitor center, locked myself inside, and sat with my back against the door until my supervisor arrived 20 minutes later. When we returned to Grotto Geyser with 2 other rangers, the boardwalk was empty. The only sound was the normal hiss and bubble of thermal features doing what they'd done for thousands of years. I filed a detailed report this time, described exactly what I'd seen and heard. My supervisor read it carefully, then asked me how much sleep I'd been getting. Said that night shifts could play tricks on your perception, especially in environments with poor visibility and unusual sounds. I almost accepted that explanation, almost convinced myself it had been fatigue and stress and steam creating illusions. Then he showed me the archive file. It was old, from 1987, written by a ranger named Thomas Whitfield, who'd worked the same night patrol route I did. In careful handwriting, he'd documented encounters with what he called thermal echoes, figures made of steam that appeared on the boardwalks, always at night, always near the largest geysers, figures that spoke in the voices of people who had died in the basin over the years. "How many?" I asked. "How many people have died here?" My supervisor closed the file. "Officially, 22 since the park was established. Those are the documented ones, but people have been dying in these thermal features since long before this was a park. Trappers, Native Americans passing through, settlers. There's no count for those. And they're still here," I said, "in the steam." He didn't confirm or deny it, just told me to take a few days off, get some rest, and when I came back, he'd pair me with a partner for night shifts. I didn't take the time off. I came back the next night and the night after that, because now that I knew what to look for, I saw them everywhere. Not every night, but often enough. Figures standing at the edges of hot springs, their forms wavering in the heat. Shadows that moved across the boardwalks when nothing solid passed. And always, the voices rising from the steam, repeating the last words of people who'd gotten too close, who'd slipped on wet rocks, who'd ignored the warnings and died in water hot enough to dissolve flesh from bone. The park doesn't talk about it. There's no plaque, no memorial, just warning signs that tell you to stay on the boardwalks, to watch your step, to supervise your children. Simple instructions that most people follow. But I think about the ones who didn't. The 22 documented deaths and all the undocumented ones stretching back through time. I think about how the thermal features are fed by water that cycles deep underground, through channels and chambers that might take decades or centuries to complete a full circuit. And I wonder if the steam remembers everything it touches, if it holds on to the heat of living bodies long after they've dissolved away, replaying their final moments in water and air and mist. I left Yellowstone at the end of that season. When people ask why, I tell them I wanted to try something new, work somewhere with more daylight hours. I don't tell them that I still hear the voices sometimes, late at night when I'm half asleep. Dozens of them, talking over each other, asking questions that have no answers. Where's the path? Why is it so hot? Help me find my way back. And always, underneath the rest, that one repeated phrase. Don't let me fall. I never learned who said it first or when they died. But I know they're still there, in the steam rising from the geysers, in the mist that hangs over the hot springs, still asking for help that no one can give. If you ever visit Yellowstone, stay on the boardwalks. Watch your step. And if you're there at night, when the crowds have gone and the basin returns to its ancient rhythms, listen carefully to what the steam is saying. It might be trying to warn you, or it might be trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. There's a rule most Yellowstone rangers learn quickly. When you find something that doesn't belong in the wilderness, you document it and move on. You don't ask too many questions about how it got there. Still listening? Drop a comment and tell me where you're hearing this from. Your bedroom? Your car? I want to know who's out there in the dark with me. My name is Alex, though I'm changing identifying details for obvious reasons. I worked wildlife management at Yellowstone from 2018 through 2020, specializing in predator monitoring. What happened during my final season is the reason I now work at a zoo instead of in the field. In September 2020, we started getting unusual reports from the Hayden Valley. Hikers kept mentioning a photography blind near the Yellowstone River that wasn't supposed to be there. For those who don't know, a blind is basically a camouflage tent that wildlife photographers use to get close to animals without being seen. They're allowed in some areas with permits, but not in Hayden Valley. Too much sensitive wildlife activity. My supervisor asked me to hike out and dismantle it. Simple removal job. I'd done it before with illegal tree stands and abandoned camps. I headed out on a cool morning when fog still clung to the valley floor. The location coordinates put the blind about 2 miles from the nearest trail, tucked into a grove of cottonwoods along the river. As I approached, I could see it clearly. Professional setup, high-quality camouflage netting, positioned with a clear view of a meadow where elk frequently grazed. What struck me immediately was how perfectly placed it was. Whoever built it understood animal behavior, the wind direction, the sight lines, the natural cover. This wasn't amateur work. I called out as I approached, standard procedure. Park Service, this is an unauthorized structure. If anyone's inside, make yourself known. No response. The blind sat silent, its entrance flap tied shut. I untied it and looked inside. The interior was larger than I expected, maybe 8 feet by 6 feet, tall enough to stand in. A folding chair sat facing the mesh window that overlooked the meadow. Next to it, a small table held a thermos, still warm to the touch, and a notebook. But no camera, no tripod, no photography equipment at all. That should have been my first warning. I picked up the notebook and flipped it open. The pages were filled with observations, written in neat, tiny handwriting. Dates, times, detailed notes about animal movements, elk herd sizes, wolf pack locations, grizzly bear feeding patterns. The level of detail was extraordinary. Professional researchers didn't keep notes this thorough. As I read further, the entries became more specific. Not just what animals did, but which individual animals. Physical descriptions accurate enough to identify specific elk cows, particular wolves, individual bison. Then the notes changed tone. Subject 4 separated from herd at 1437, limping slightly, vulnerable. Subject 9 shows signs of illness, coughing, moving slowly, alone near tree line. Subject 12 defending calf, aggressive, distracted. The word subject appeared over and over, always with a number. I flipped to the back of the notebook where someone had created an index. Dozens of entries, each with a number, species, and a single word status. Taken, 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 taken. My stomach tightened. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Alex at the Hayden Blind site. I've got something here you need to see. Requesting additional personnel." The response crackled back. "Can it wait until tomorrow? We're short-staffed today." I looked at the notebook again, then at the warm thermos. Negative. Whoever set this up was here recently, within the last few hours. Copy. Sending someone your way. ETA 90 minutes. I stepped out of the blind to wait, keeping the notebook with me. The meadow stretched out peacefully, morning sun burning off the last of the fog. A small herd of elk grazed near the tree line, maybe 30 animals. That's when I noticed the blood. Not much, just drops leading from the blind toward the river, spaced about 3 feet apart. Fresh enough that they were still dark red, not yet oxidized to brown. I followed them slowly, one hand on my bear spray. The drops led through the grass, past a cluster of willows, and down to the riverbank. That's where I found the elk. It was a cow, maybe 4 years old, lying on its side at the water's edge. Its throat had been cut with something extremely sharp. Single clean slice. But here's what made my hands start shaking. It had been partially butchered. Whoever killed it had removed specific cuts of meat with surgical precision. Not the usual work of poachers who took quarters and ran. This was careful, deliberate, like someone following a diagram. And they'd only taken about 20 pounds, left the rest. I radioed it in immediately. "Base, I've got a fresh elk kill at my location, recent butchering. This is an active poaching site." Within 3 hours, law enforcement arrived with a full investigative team. They photographed everything, collected samples, and searched the area thoroughly. What they found made the situation much worse. The blind wasn't the only structure. Deeper in the cottonwoods, someone had built a cache. Buried coolers contained meat, all of it carefully wrapped and labeled with dates and subject numbers that matched the notebook. Some of the packages were months old. They also found tools, knives, saws, processing equipment, everything you'd need for field butchering, and something else. A second notebook, this one with different kinds of entries, recipes, detailed cooking instructions, and notes on taste, texture, quality. The handwriting was the same. Subject 4, taken September 3rd, hindquarter aged 7 days. Excellent marbling, prepared rare. Notes, gamey but tender. We'll try different preparation next time. There were dozens of entries like this, going back almost 2 years. Elk, deer, bison. each one documented like a food diary. The investigator, a woman named Sarah, read through it with an expression that went from professional concern to barely concealed disgust. "This isn't poaching for profit," she said quietly. "This is someone who's been hunting park wildlife for personal consumption. Someone who's treating this like their private game reserve." We found tracks leading away from the cache, heading deeper into the backcountry. Sarah wanted to follow them immediately, but the light was failing. We marked the location and agreed to return at first light with a full team. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those entries, the clinical observation, the careful planning, the fact that someone had been doing this for 2 years without being caught. They knew the ranger patrol patterns. They knew where cameras were positioned. They knew everything. The next morning, we returned with 6 rangers and 2 law enforcement officers. The tracks led us almost 4 miles into the backcountry to a small clearing near a seasonal creek. There, someone had built a more permanent camp. Not a tent, but an actual structure. Logs chinked with mud, a stone fire ring, a smoking rack for meat. It looked like something from 100 years ago, like a trapper's cabin from before the park existed. Inside, we found more notebooks, years of them stacked carefully on a rough-hewn shelf. The earliest dated back to 2015. 5 years of detailed observations, 5 years of taking animals, always the weak or the isolated, always in ways that wouldn't be noticed. A single elk from a herd of 50, a lone bison separated from its group, an old wolf past its prime. The entries described it as sustainable harvesting. The writer claimed to be taking less than natural predators would, argued that they were actually helping maintain healthy populations by removing weak animals. But here's what really got to me. The most recent entries weren't about animals anymore. Observed hikers on Eastern Trail, solo male, mid-30s, inexperienced based on gear choices, stopped frequently, separated from main trail at mile marker 7. Family of 4 on northern route, father leading, appeared distracted by photography. Children not properly supervised near elk herd. Mother staying back with youngest. Park employee, female, late 20s. Patterns suggest weekly monitoring walk, always alone, always same time. The descriptions went on for pages. Dozens of people, all observed with the same clinical detail previously reserved for animals. All marked with numbers, all with notes about vulnerability, isolation, behavior patterns. None of them marked as taken. Not yet. But the final entry, dated the day before I found the blind, made my blood run cold. New ranger on wildlife detail. Male, early 30s, works alone, predictable routes, will investigate unauthorized blind as expected. Opportunity. They'd been watching me, studying me. I was in the notebook. Sarah saw me reading it and quietly took it from my hands. "We need to leave," she said. "Now." We packed up everything as evidence and hiked out quickly, looking over our shoulders the whole way. A manhunt started that afternoon, but they never found anyone. The camp looked weeks old, abandoned. Whoever had been living there knew we were coming and disappeared. The investigation went federal. FBI got involved because it crossed into potential crimes against persons, not just wildlife. They tracked down some of the people mentioned in the recent notebooks. Most confirmed they'd been hiking in Yellowstone on the dates listed. A few remembered feeling watched, but none had seen anyone. 3 months later, they found another camp. This one in Grand Teton, 60 miles south. Same setup, same notebooks, same clinical observations. It had been abandoned even longer. Then another in Glacier National Park, and another in Olympic. Whoever this person was, they were moving between parks, setting up in remote areas, living off the land and observing. Always watching, always documenting, always staying just ahead of discovery. The case is still open, technically unsolved, Rangers at multiple parks have been briefed. We're all a little more careful now about hiking alone, about following predictable patterns. I think about those notebooks sometimes, the way the handwriting was so neat, so controlled, the way they documented everything with the same detached interest you'd use for a nature study, the way they watched people the same way they watched animals, looking for weakness, for isolation, for opportunity. And I think about that last entry with my description in it, the clinical assessment of my roots, my habits, my vulnerabilities. I was supposed to be the wildlife expert, the one doing the observing. But in that blind, surrounded by notebooks full of observations, I realized something that still keeps me awake. In truly wild places, you're not always at the top of the food chain. Sometimes you're just another subject being studied, another number in someone's notebook, another animal being watched from a blind, waiting to see if you'll do something that makes you vulnerable enough to take. Most people think the most dangerous thing about working search and rescue in Yellowstone is the terrain or the weather. They're wrong. The dangerous part is what you find when you're looking for someone who doesn't want to be found. If you're still here, let me know in the comments. What time is it where you are? Are you alone right now? My name is Carter, and I've been doing search and rescue work at Yellowstone for 9 years. I'm changing some details here for privacy, but what I'm about to tell you is pulled directly from my incident reports and personal notes from August 2019. We got the call on a Thursday afternoon. A solo hiker named David Brennan had failed to return from a permitted 3-day backcountry trip. His car was still at the trailhead. His checkout date had passed 2 days ago. His emergency contact, a brother in Colorado, hadn't heard from him and was worried enough to drive up and file the report himself. Standard missing hiker protocol. We gathered David's information. Age 41, experienced backpacker, in good physical condition, carrying proper equipment. His permit showed he'd planned to camp at 2 designated sites in the thoroughfare region before hiking back out. The thoroughfare is about as remote as you can get in the lower 48 states. Miles from any road, heavily forested, with creek crossings that could be dangerous if water levels were high. It wasn't unusual for hikers to run late out there, but 2 days overdue was concerning. We assembled a team of 4. Me, another ranger named Mike, and 2 volunteers with wilderness medicine training. We headed out at dawn the next morning, hiking fast, covering the trail David should have taken. The first campsite on his permit was empty. No sign he'd stayed there. Fire ring cold, bear box unused. We continued to the second site, deeper in the backcountry, a solid 8-hour hike from the trailhead. That's where we found his tent. It was set up properly, rainfly secured, positioned in the designated camping spot. But something felt immediately wrong. The tent fabric was moving slightly in the breeze, and I could tell from the way it shifted that it was empty. Mike called out, "David Brennan, this is Park Service Search and Rescue. If you can hear me, respond." Nothing, just whine through the pines and the distant sound of a creek. We approached carefully. I've been on enough searches to know that sometimes you find people in their tents who are injured, hypothermic, or worse. The flap was partially unzipped. I opened it fully and looked inside. The tent was neat, almost unnaturally so. Sleeping bag laid out, but not slept in. Backpack propped in the corner, still full. Camp stove on the ground, unused. Everything exactly as you'd arrange it when setting up camp, but nothing showing signs of actual use. "His pack's still here," I said to Mike. "All his gear, food, water filter, everything." Mike frowned. "People don't leave their supplies. Not someone experienced." We checked the surrounding area. No sign of a struggle. No blood, no torn fabric, no scattered equipment. The bear box was empty, suggesting David hadn't stored food yet, which meant he'd probably set up the tent and then left for some reason before settling in for the night. But his boots were in the tent, still laced. sitting neatly by the sleeping bag. "Who hikes away from camp barefoot?" one of the volunteers asked. Nobody answered because we all knew the answer. Nobody does that. Not by choice. We spent the next 6 hours searching an expanding radius around the campsite, calling David's name, looking for tracks or any sign of which direction he'd gone. The terrain was rough, rocky in places, heavily forested in others. We found nothing. As daylight started to fail, we made the decision to camp at David's site and resume searching at first light. We set up our own tents and prepared a cold dinner, conserving our stove fuel. That's when Mike found the notebook. It was tucked into the side pocket of David's backpack, the kind of place you'd put something you wanted easy access to. A small spiral-bound journal, the type hikers use for trail notes. The first dozen pages were normal entries. David's thoughts about the hike, observations about wildlife he'd seen, notes about trail conditions. His handwriting was neat, his entries thoughtful. Then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. Day 2, evening. Something followed me for the last 3 miles, staying just out of sight in the trees. Thought it was a bear at first, but the pattern is wrong. Bears don't pace you. They either confront or avoid. This is something else. The next entry was dated the following morning. Barely slept. It circled the tent all night. Could hear it moving through the undergrowth. Heavy steps, bipedal. Called out several times. No response. At dawn, found tracks near the tent. Too large for human. Wrong shape for bear. 5 toes, but the arrangement is off. I felt my skin prickle as I read. Mike was reading over my shoulder, his face tight. The entries continued. Hike to the second campsite as planned. It's still following. Saw it clearly this time, standing in the trees about 50 yards off trail. Tall, maybe 7 feet. Dark fur or hair, face hidden in shadow. It didn't move when I stopped, just watched. When I continued hiking, it paralleled me through the forest. Set up camp, don't know what else to do. Can't hike out in the dark. Radio doesn't work out here. Satellite phone won't connect, too much tree cover. It's standing at the edge of the clearing now. I can see its outline. It's been there for 20 minutes, not moving, just watching the tent. The final entry was written in shakier handwriting. It's circling again, closer this time. I can hear it breathing, heavy, wet sounds. I'm leaving the tent. If I stay here, it will eventually come in. Better to face it in the open. If anyone finds this, tell my brother I'm sorry I didn't listen when he said not to hike alone. The page ended there. The rest of the notebook was blank. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Mike pulled out his satellite phone and called the base station. We needed more people, tracking dogs, maybe law enforcement. While he made the call, I walked the perimeter of the campsite with my flashlight, looking for the tracks David had mentioned. The beam caught something near the tree line, maybe 30 yards from the tent. Depressions in the soft earth. Large, roughly human-shaped, but wrong. Too big, toes splayed at odd angles. I knelt and examined them carefully, trying to think of any animal that could make marks like this. Nothing came to mind. I followed them a short distance into the forest. They led away from the camp in a straight line, each print spaced about 4 feet apart, too far for human strides. After about 20 yards, they were joined by a second set of prints. These were smaller, human-sized, barefoot human prints. The 2 sets of tracks continued together, side by side, deeper into the forest. After another 30 feet, they stopped at a large tree. Claw marks gouged the bark about 8 feet up, and at the base, pressed into the dirt, was a clear handprint. Human. Adult male, based on the size. The fingers were splayed wide, pressed down hard, like someone had been kneeling and using their hand to brace themselves, or like someone had been forced to their knees. I felt ice in my stomach. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the ground, and returned to camp. "We need to leave," I told Mike quietly. "Right now." He'd just finished his call. "Backup's coming at first light. We're supposed to hold position." "I don't care what we're supposed to do. We need to get back to the trailhead." Something in my voice made him look at me carefully. "What did you find?" I told him about the tracks, about the handprint, about the way they led away together into the forest. One of the volunteers spoke up. "We can't abandon a search. What if he's out there injured?" "Then we'll find him in the morning with more people and daylight," I said. "But right now, I'm not staying here after dark." We packed quickly, leaving David's tent and gear in place for the investigation team. We hiked out by headlamp, moving fast, not talking much. The forest felt different at night, heavier, like something was watching from just beyond the reach of our lights. We made it back to the trailhead by midnight. A larger search team went in at dawn with dogs, tracking experts and law enforcement. They found David 3 days later, almost 12 miles from his campsite, moving through the forest in a direction that led nowhere in particular. He was barefoot, wearing only his shirt and pants. His feet were torn up badly, bleeding, infected. But he was alive. He was also unresponsive, eyes open, walking steadily, but completely nonverbal. When they approached him, he didn't seem to notice them, just kept walking in that same straight line until they physically stopped him. They brought him out on a stretcher. Medical evaluation showed dehydration, exposure, infected lacerations on his feet, but nothing that explained his mental state. No head trauma, no obvious physical cause for his condition. He was transferred to a hospital in Bozeman. I visited him once, a week after the rescue. He sat in his room staring at the wall, hands folded in his lap. The doctor said he'd started speaking occasionally, single words or short phrases, but nothing coherent. Mostly he just sat and stared. I tried talking to him, telling him he was safe, asking if he remembered what happened in the forest. For a long time, he didn't respond. Then, just as I was about to leave, he turned and looked at me. His eyes were clear, focused. For just a moment, he seemed fully present. "It wanted me to follow," he said quietly. So I did. It showed me where it lives, under the roots, in the dark. It showed me the others. "What others?" I asked. His eyes unfocused again, sliding past me to the wall. "The ones who didn't walk fast enough." That was the last coherent thing he said. 3 months later, he was transferred to a long-term psychiatric facility. As far as I know, he's still there. The official report listed it as a psychotic episode triggered by isolation and stress. Possible encounter with a bear that sparked paranoid delusions. The tracks were attributed to unclear impressions in soft earth, misidentified in poor light. They never explained the notebook entries written before his episode began. They never explained how he walked 12 miles barefoot through rough terrain in a straight line that didn't follow any trail. They never explained what he meant by the others. I still work search and rescue, but I don't take calls for the thoroughfare region anymore. When they ask me why, I tell them my knees aren't what they used to be, that the long hikes are getting harder. I don't tell them about David's journal, about the tracks that led into the forest in pairs, one set human and one set something else, about the handprint at the base of the tree. And I don't tell them that sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about what David said, about being shown where something lives, under the roots, in the dark, about the others who didn't walk fast enough. Some rescues succeed because you find the person in time. Others succeed because you're allowed to find them, because whatever took them decides to let them go. I think David was let go. I think something walked him through that forest for 3 days, and then released him, knowing he'd never be whole enough to tell anyone what he'd seen. And I think the reason we found him at all was because it wanted us to know it was there, watching, waiting, ready to walk alongside the next solo hiker who camps in the wrong place, ready to show them where it lives. The thing about working winter patrol in Yellowstone is that you learn to trust the silence. When the silence breaks, something has gone wrong. Still with me? Comment below and tell me what you hear right now in your room. Traffic? Wind? Nothing at all? My name is Rebecca, though I'm using a different name here for reasons that will become clear. I worked winter operations at Yellowstone from 2016 through 2022. What I'm about to describe happened during my final winter, and it's the reason I transferred to a park that closes completely in the off-season. Most people don't realize Yellowstone stays partially open in winter. The crowds disappear, the roads close, and the park transforms into something older and stranger. We maintain a skeleton crew, a few rangers, maintenance staff, researchers studying winter ecology. That's it. In winter, you travel by snowmobile or ski. The landscape turns into endless white, broken only by dark pines and the steam from thermal features. It's beautiful in a hostile way, the kind of beauty that will kill you if you're not careful. My job was to patrol the backcountry access points, making sure the seasonal closures were respected and checking the few winter campsites that remained open for permitted users. Most days I saw no one, just snow, trees, and animal tracks. The incident started in late January 2022. I was doing a routine check of the canyon area, where a few cross-country ski trails remained open. The morning was clear, temperature around 10 degrees, with that particular quality of cold that makes your breath freeze in your beard or eyelashes. I'd just finished checking the trail register when I noticed fresh ski tracks heading toward a closed area. 2 sets, parallel, moving at a steady pace. The tracks were recent, probably made that morning. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Rebecca at Canyon. I have unauthorized access into closed area. 2 skiers heading east toward the rim, moving to intercept." "Copy, Rebecca. Use caution. Radio check in 30 minutes. I followed the tracks. They led away from the maintained trail, crossing a snow-covered meadow, and entering a section of forest that had been closed since November due to unstable thermal features. Signs clearly marked the closure. Anyone skiing here knew they were breaking rules. The tracks were easy to follow, clean parallel lines with regular pole plants. Whoever made them was experienced, moving efficiently through varied terrain. After about 20 minutes, the tracks stopped. Not gradually, not at a clearing or obstacle. They just ended in the middle of a small open space between trees. One moment, clear tracks. The next, untouched snow. I stopped and stared at the place where the tracks terminated. The snow beyond showed no disturbance. No indication the skiers had turned around or removed their skis. The tracks simply ceased to exist. I circled the area carefully, looking for any explanation. Sometimes wind could fill in tracks, but this was fresh and there was no wind. The surrounding snow was smooth and unmarked, except for the single line of tracks leading to this spot and going nowhere. My radio crackled. "Rebecca, 30-minute check-in." I keyed the mic, eyes still scanning the snow. "Copy, base. I have a situation. The tracks I was following just stop. No sign of the skiers." A pause. "Stop as in they turn back?" "Stop as in they end. Middle of the forest. No explanation." Another pause, longer this time. "Copy. Mark your location and return to base. We'll send a team at first light tomorrow if needed." I marked the GPS coordinates and took photos. As I was preparing to ski back, I noticed something I'd missed before. About 20 feet to my right, barely visible in the shadow of a large pine, was a depression in the snow. Not a natural drift, something rectangular. I approached carefully. It was a snow-covered shape about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. I brushed away the top layer of snow with my gloved hand. Underneath was a wooden sled, old handmade, with rope handles and metal runners. The wood was dark with age and wear, and the design looked like something from a century ago. But it wasn't weathered. It looked maintained, functional. And it was sitting on top of the snow, not buried in it, which meant it had been placed here recently after the last snowfall 3 days ago. I stood up quickly, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The forest had gone completely quiet. No wind, no bird calls, no distant sounds of the park's geothermal features. Just empty silence pressing in from all sides. I skied back to base, faster than was probably safe, looking over my shoulder more than I'm proud to admit. That night, I pulled up historical records for the canyon area. I was looking for anything that might explain what I'd found. Old ranger reports, incident logs, anything. I found a file from 1983. A ranger named Harrison had documented finding ski tracks in closed areas during winter patrols. The tracks always led to dead ends, always disappeared without explanation. In his notes, he mentioned finding old equipment in the areas where tracks terminated. Snowshoes once, a pair of antique skis another time, and once a wooden sled. His final entry in the file, dated March 1983, read, "Recommend avoiding solo winter patrols in canyon thermal areas. Pattern suggests coordinated activity by person or persons with extensive knowledge of park backcountry. Purpose unknown. Methods of avoiding detection suggest this is not recreational use." The file ended there. I looked up Harrison's employment records. He'd transferred to Glacier National Park that spring and retired in the early 1990s. I should have left it alone, should have filed my report and let someone else handle the follow-up. But something about those tracks bothered me. The way they just stopped, like the skiers had been erased mid-stride. 3 days later, I went back. I told myself I was doing a follow-up check, making sure no one else had accessed the closed area. I brought a camera, extra radio batteries, and paid careful attention to my route. The sled was gone. The depression where it had sat was still visible, but the object itself had been removed. Fresh ski tracks led away from the spot, the same parallel lines I'd seen before. They headed deeper into the closed area, toward a section where thermal features made the ground unstable even in winter. I followed them again, knowing I shouldn't, unable to stop myself. The tracks led me almost a mile into terrain I'd never patrolled. The forest grew denser, the thermal activity more visible. Steam rose in columns from hidden vents, and patches of bare ground showed where heat prevented snow from accumulating. The tracks led to a cabin. I stopped at the tree line and stared. It was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, built from weathered logs. A thin stream of smoke rose from a metal chimney. Snow had been cleared from around the door, and 2 pairs of skis leaned against the exterior wall. This wasn't a park structure. I knew every authorized building in this district. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. I pulled out my radio, then hesitated. If I called this in, I'd have to explain why I was a mile deep into closed terrain, why I'd pursued this instead of waiting for backup. I decided to observe first, document, then radio. I worked my way closer, moving from tree to tree, until I was about 30 yards from the structure. From this distance, I could see the skis more clearly. They were old, wooden with leather bindings, the style they used 50 years ago or more. The door of the cabin opened. 2 figures emerged. They wore dark, heavy clothing, long coats, fur hats, clothing that looked handmade. One was taller, the other shorter and stockier. They moved with purpose, checking the skis, adjusting the bindings. I raised my camera and took photos, the shutters sounding impossibly loud in the quiet. The taller figure's head snapped toward my position. For a moment, we locked eyes across the distance. What I saw in that face made my blood go cold. The features were wrong, proportioned incorrectly. The eyes too far apart, the mouth too wide. It looked like a human face recreated by something that had only heard humans described but never seen one. The shorter figure turned toward me as well. Same wrong proportions, same unsettling wrongness. They didn't call out, didn't shout warnings or demands. They simply began putting on the skis, moving with unnatural speed and precision. I ran. I didn't ski. I ran on my skis, pushing harder than I ever had, crashing through brush, ignoring technique, just moving. Behind me, I could hear the whisper of skis on snow, moving fast, impossibly fast, gaining on me. My radio crackled. I grabbed it without slowing. "Rebecca, this is base. Check in." "Send help," I gasped. "Canyon area, grid reference." I rattled off coordinates. "Being pursued." "Rebecca, say again. Pursued by what?" I didn't answer. I could hear them closer now, that steady whisper of skis getting louder. I risked a glance back. They were 20 feet behind me, moving in perfect parallel lines, their faces blank and wrong, their movements too smooth and coordinated to be human. I broke from the trees into open meadow. The main trail was visible ahead, maybe 200 yards. If I could reach it, reach the maintained area where other rangers might be. My ski caught on something hidden beneath the snow. I went down hard, tumbling, losing my poles. I scrambled to my feet, ready to abandon the skis and run. But the whisper of pursuit had stopped. I turned. The figures stood at the tree line, exactly at the boundary between closed area and maintained trail. They made no move to continue pursuit, just stood there, watching with those wrong faces. Then slowly, they turned and skied back into the forest, their movements perfectly synchronized, leaving parallel tracks that would probably disappear before anyone else saw them. I made it back to base. A team went out that afternoon to the coordinates I'd given. They found my dropped pole and the tracks from my fall. But no cabin, no pursuers' tracks, nothing that corroborated my story except my photos. The photos showed the cabin clearly, showed two figures emerging, their faces pixelated and blurred in a way that suggested camera malfunction rather than revealing the wrongness I'd seen. The official report listed it as a possible encounter with squatters or illegal winter campers, complicated by equipment failure and environmental stress. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but strongly advised to avoid solo deep terrain patrols. I put in for transfer a week later. Before I left, I tracked down Harrison, the ranger from the 1983 file. He was in his late 70s living in Kalispell. I called him, explained who I was, and asked what he'd really seen in the canyon area that winter. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "You saw them too." "What are they?" I asked. "I don't know, but they've been there longer than the park, maybe longer than we've been keeping records. They come out in winter when we're few and the land remembers what it was before we mapped it. They're not violent as far as I can tell. They just want to be left alone." "The tracks that disappear," I said. "The old equipment." "Territory markers," Harrison said. "Warnings, maybe. This is ours, stay out. Most rangers never see them, but once you do, they know you. They watch you after that. Make sure you understand the boundary." "Why didn't you report this? The real version?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Would you have believed me if you hadn't seen them yourself? Would anyone?" I didn't have an answer for that. I've been at my new park for 8 months now. It closes completely in winter, roads gated, no staff on site from November through April. I like it that way. Sometimes I still think about those figures at the tree line, standing perfectly still, watching me with faces that were almost human, but not quite. I think about the cabin that appeared and disappeared, about Harrison's theory that they've been there longer than we have, living in the spaces we mark as closed, as dangerous, as off-limits. Maybe the closures aren't just about protecting visitors from the environment. Maybe they're also about protecting us from the things that consider certain places theirs. that were there long before we arrived with our maps and boundaries and rules. The Park Service doesn't talk about it officially, but if you work winters in Yellowstone long enough, someone will eventually pull you aside and give you the real advice. Stay on maintained trails, respect the closures, and if you see tracks that end without explanation, don't follow them, because some boundaries aren't marked on maps. Some are older, deeper, and enforced by things that have been waiting in the winter silence longer than any of us can imagine.